It's time for another episode of Gospel Preaching Live, brought to you by the Kearney Church of Christ, which meets at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri. Make plans to come out and visit the brethren, who look forward to seeing you. And now the host of Gospel Preaching Live, Richard Dodson.
Okay, welcome back to another edition of Gospel Preaching Live. We're sure glad that you could join us. And wherever you may be listening to this broadcast, we pray that you'll find it edifying and that you will be driven to either share this message with other people or to ask questions. If you have questions of anything that's said, please contact me. You can go to the number at the bottom of the screen or the email address that's listed. For those listening perhaps on the radio show, it's 816-686-9517. with the email being gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. That's gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com. And go ahead and ask your questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. We'll have to see what I know. I may not have enough information to be able to answer that question, but I'll do my best. So we'll see what happens. Tonight, we're going to talk about Gehazi's deception. Now, I got to say up front, I am really not good with pronunciation of biblical names. There is a way that seems right unto me, to quote scripture, on how to pronounce names in the Bible. And if left to myself, I'm going to call him Gehazi. But that, according to what my research is not the proper way to pronounce it. It's Gehazi. And so if I mess up, I have been practicing all afternoon trying to say it the right way. If you hear me say it the wrong way, if I call it Gehazi, just say that's Richard. He's doing the best he can, because I really did. I practiced it. But for your own record, based on my research, you can check this out yourself. It's Gehazi. So we're going to talk about his deception. Now, I'm going to make myself small and bring him up big because I want you to kind of look at the picture. He's going to end up with leprosy because of his deception. And the reason I'm telling this story is because I have preached about Naaman so many times, but I have ignored the story of Gehazi. And he has a story that needs to be told. It's something that we need to learn from. And so I thought tonight, we're going to take a look at this story. And we're going to put Naaman on the background because he is part of the story of Naaman. And I hope everybody will study Naaman's story. It's a great story. And it's one that shows how man is to obey God's will instead of trying to lean on his own understanding. But Gehazi comes up at the bottom of the passage. And what happens to him is truly a good lesson for us all. It has to do with deception. And we know that deceiving is wrong. In Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 14, which is the text of our lesson, it says, God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. We can't hide things. And sometimes we try to hide things from other people, thinking that we can get away with it if we lie, if we deceive. Well, God's going to bring all those things out to light. Those things are going to be made known. So we're not going to get away with it forever. We might get away with it for a little bit, but we're not going to get away with it forever. And in the case of Gehazi, we're going to see that he didn't get away with it at all, but yet judgment came down upon him. And as you can see in the picture, he was stricken with leprosy. And that's not something that we don't want judgment to happen to anyone. And so, especially on the last day, we want everyone to be able to go to heaven. So I thought we would talk about deception because deception is such a strong thing. People deceive all the time. I mean, look in the world of politics. How many times do politicians lie or even practice deceit? The things behind the scenes to try to deceive us, to make it seem like one thing when it's really something else. That's a form of lying. Deception is. And so, sometimes we try to practice that same thing. I'll be honest with you, I've done it before. I've told the story at church when I was a young man. My parents went out of town, and I didn't get up and go to church. I was about 18 years old, and I was tired. I wanted to sleep in. And an elder, I knew he was going to be calling me, and he did. And so he called the house. I answered the phone. I knew him very well. Him and his son, we were really good friends. He wanted to know why I wasn't at church. And so when I was up there late in bed wrestling with my conscience, I knew the elder was going to call. And so I looked around on the floor and I didn't see my shoes. And so I just said, okay, that's what I can tell him. I didn't find my shoes. And so when he called, I said, oh, I was ready. I was going to come, but I couldn't find my shoes. You see, and he knew I was deceiving him. I didn't look hard. I didn't look in the closet, didn't look under the bed. If I had looked, I'd have found them. I think they were in the closet, if I remember. I mean, I didn't want to find them. I was looking for an excuse. And so that was a practice of deception. And people do that from time to time, trying to get away with something so they can get what they want. And we as Christians, we need to put that away. That is something of the devil. That's not something we want to do. And hopefully, as we mature spiritually, that's something that we do put away. But it's not something that we want to practice, because judgment's going to come upon those who practice deception. And so let's go ahead. Well, we're going to look at what God has to say about deception, lying, and then we're going to get into Gehazi's story. But in Mark chapter 7 and verse 20 through 23, the Pharisees had questioned Jesus, allowing the disciples to eat with unwashed hands. And it was they were binding their tradition upon man, that it'd be wrong not to wash your hands before you eat. Now, I admit it's clean. You want to practice cleanliness, but they were making it a law. And of course, when this is discussed with the Lord, the Lord warned them, as we read in other passages, just stay away from these guys. He said, these guys are hypocrites. Don't have anything to do with them. But as he often did about the Pharisees. But notice what he says about that very issue. He says, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness. And then he says deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. He says all these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. And before he even talked about it, it's not the things that go into a man that defiles him. It's the things that come out. And I should have underlined that last sentence when it says all these evil things. And the things that he mentioned was deceit. And so Jesus himself is saying deceit is evil. And you know what? We should stop the lesson right now and just close up shop, because that should settle it. Jesus said deceit's evil. We're done. But there's more to it. I prepared more, so I'm going to share it with you. But if you wanted to stop right there, that's a good place to stop, because when Jesus says it's evil, it's evil. In 1 Peter chapter 2 and looking at verse 21, Peter says, for to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. Now, are we not, as Christians, if you believe you're a Christian, are you not a disciple of Jesus Christ? And if you're not a disciple of Jesus Christ, I hope you'll reach out and contact me so that we can talk about that. We can study about how you can become a disciple of Jesus Christ. But if you are, then you know that your responsibility is not to follow man, but the master, and that master being Jesus Christ. And if we're going to follow his example that he left us, there was no deceit in him. And so we have to understand, with Jesus saying it's evil to practice deceit, and that Jesus didn't practice deceit, then it should be our aim not to deceive anyone. We have to be speaking truth. That's especially true with preachers. preachers and elders, and with Christians, need to make sure if you cause the listener to doubt your intentions, that can have devastating effects on trying to teach others the truth. And so we need to make sure we keep ourselves clean from deceit. And that's not easy. No, no, no. Temptation's strong. But we need to make sure that we don't practice such things. Now, the Apostle Paul dealt with false apostles in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. And I want you to notice what he says about these false apostles. He says, what I am doing, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission they work on the same terms as we do. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen. They're deceitful. They disguise themselves as apostles of Christ. And he says, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. And there are some today who like to deceive people into thinking that they are faithful Christians doing the hand in hand doing the work of the Lord with you, when they know full well they're not. But they want to make people think that. And they're deceitful workers. And we're going to look at an example of that here in just a few seconds. But we got to we have to understand that's not something that we can do as a Christian. In Psalms 101 and verse 7, David says, no one who practices deceit shall dwell in my house, and no one who utters lies shall continue before my eyes. Well, that's speaking by inspiration. That's what the Lord's saying. No one who practices deceit shall dwell in my house. In other words, you're not going to heaven if you're practicing deceit. Now, in Acts chapter 5, this is the example I was going to tell you we're going to talk about in a few seconds. Well, we're here. Now we're at that point. In Acts chapter 5, there were a husband and wife who wanted to make people think they were working hand in hand with them and doing the Lord's work. If you remember, at the end of Acts chapter 4, people were selling what they had and laying it at the apostles' feet. And there was a need for that. Everyone had been converted. You read about all those who were converted in Acts chapter 2. The church is getting started, and people needed to learn. They had come to Jerusalem to worship, and they probably weren't planning on being there that long. And so there was a need. And so people were willing to sacrifice everything in order to obtain that very truth that was being revealed by the apostles. But now along comes Ananias and Sapphira, and they weren't exactly doing it the same way as everybody else. They were going to practice deceit. And they had land, they sold it, but they kept back a portion, but they laid the money down at the apostles' feet, and given the appearance that they had given everything. So they were practicing deceit. And notice what Peter said. He said, Ananias, why has Satan filled? This is Acts chapter 5, starting in verse 3. Why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? For him to do it wasn't even wrong, because he says, while it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not your disposal? And he says, why is it you have contrived this deed in your heart? You see, he didn't have to do that. He could have gave them a portion, but he wanted everybody to think he was doing like everybody else and giving everything. So he lied. He practiced deceit. And Peter goes on to say, you have not lied to man, but to God. And that's what we need to notice. When we practice deceiving, we are lying to God. And it says, when Ananias heard these words, he fell down and breathed his last, and great fear came upon all who heard it. So they bound him up, took him out and buried him. And then his wife came in, and of course, same thing happened to her. So we can understand that the Lord doesn't want deception in us. He doesn't want us to do that. And so we have to be on guard. We have to understand, as we already pointed out, Jesus said deception is evil. All right. That leads us to the story of Naaman. That's in 2 Kings chapter 5. There's no way I can get the whole chapter up on the screen for you, so I'm not even going to try it. But I am going to attempt to tell you the story of Naaman just to kind of fill you in. Some of you may already know the story, but I am going to start reading. If you want to turn over there, I'm going to start reading at verse 15 of 2 Kings chapter 5. But that's when Gehazi shows up at the scene. But Naaman, he was a commander of the army of the king of Syria, and he was a great man. It says, the Bible says he was a mighty man of valor, but he suffered with leprosy. And on one of their raids, he had carried off this young girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. And of course, she felt bad watching Naaman suffer with his leprosy. And she was reminded of the prophet who was in Samaria, and he's thinking about Elisha. And she knew that he could help her. And so he went in and told his Lord, he says, this is what that little girl from Israel said. And the king of Syria said, well, listen, he goes, I'm going to send a letter with you. You give it to the king of Israel. And he goes, I'm going to give you 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothes. And of course, he took the letter to the king. And of course, when the king read the letter, well, he was just beside himself. He tore his clothes, which was a kind of a sign of grief, expression for them back then. And of course, he says, am I a God to kill, to make alive? And he goes, I can't cure a man of leprosy. And so he thinks it's, the king is just trying to make a quarrel with him. But Elisha, the prophet, when he heard about what took place, and, he said, send him my way. And so Naaman came to his house and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha didn't even go speak to him. He sent a messenger telling him to go wash himself 7 times in the Jordan River. And he said, if you do that, he goes, your flesh will be restored and you shall be clean. But Naaman didn't understand that. He was upset. That wasn't what he was expecting to hear. And so he was, he just walked away. He didn't plan on doing it. He thought that Elisha was going to come out and wave his hand and everything would be fine. But, he started comparing a couple of rivers in Damascus, where he was from, with the Jordan. And he said, they're cleaner rivers. He said, there's no way that this is going to happen. And it even says, the passage says, he turned and went away in a rage. But luckily for him, his servants came up to him and he said, listen, if he had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? And he said, just do this, wash and be clean. And they convinced him. He went down, he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan River. And according to Elisha, everything happened exactly the way he said. His flesh was restored, and not just restored, it was made like the flesh of a little child. So he was cured of his leprosy. All right. That's the story of Naaman. But now there's more to it that a lot of times we don't get into. And I'm going to start reading in verse 15 of 2 Kings 5. It says, he returned to the man of God, he and his company, and he came and stood before him. Now that man of God, when he says he is Naaman. When Naaman returned to the man of God, that was Elisha. So when Naaman returned to Elisha, he and all his company, he came and stood before him, and he said, behold, I know that there is no God in all of Israel, in all the earth, but in Israel. He said, so accept now a present from your servant. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive nothing. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And then Naaman said, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth, for from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. So it appears that he wanted to take some of the land from there and take it to his land. And then it appears he was going to build an altar on that land, thinking that that land, based upon, the Lord being with Israel would make it, you know, approved, I guess. I don't know, but he didn't want to offer it on Syrian land. And it said, in this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes to the house of Rimmon to worship there. And of course he has to go in and help him. So Elisha said, go in peace. And so he left. And then starting in verse 20, it says, Gehazi, the servant Elisha, the man of God, said, see, my master is spared this name in the Syrian, is not accepting from his hand what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. And Gehazi followed Naaman. And when Naaman saw someone running after him, he got down from his chariot and met him and said, is all well? And he said, all is well. My master sent me to say, they have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim, 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 chains of clothing. Okay, now there's the first lie. He said, my master sent me. That would have been Elisha. And Elisha hadn't told him to do that. And then the other one is that we don't know about. I mean, there could have been a couple of sons of the prophets who showed up, but it had nothing to do. There was no request made for anything. I would rather think that this is a lie as well. And so this whole thing that he's asking for, he's phrasing it to say that this is coming from his master, and it wasn't, which would have been Elisha. And then in verse 23, Naaman said, be pleased to accept 2 talents. And he urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing and laid them on 2 of his servants. And they carried them before Gehazi. And when they came to the hill, he took from their hand and put them in the house and sent the men away, and they departed. It appears that on the other side of the hill was where he dwelt with Elisha. And so when they got to that point, he didn't want Elisha to see them. So he took, the gifts and left. The 2 men went back to Naaman, I would assume. He went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, where have you been, Gehazi? And he said, your servant went nowhere. There's another lie. And he said to him, did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? So basically he was saying that my heart just sunk when you went after Naaman. And then he says this in verse 27, therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. And so he went out from his presence a leper like snow. All right, so I would imagine that Gehazi, we're going to look at a picture of a drawing of someone with leprosy. I would imagine because of that he had cursed him basically with loneliness. Nobody's, going to want to marry him, I would assume, a leper, much less, have children with them with that type of curse that's going to cling upon them. And that's what Elisha cast judgment upon him. He gave him the leprosy, and then also he's going to have to live a lonely life. And, that's very sad. But keep this in mind. We don't know if that leprosy saved Gehazi's soul, then it would have been a good thing. That's something we just don't know. We do read about Gehazi a little bit later, and we're going to notice, that he's still around. So, maybe it did save his soul. We don't know. But the question I have to ask is, why did he deceive? Why did he want to do these things? He was there, for instance. He saw everything that happened to the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings chapter 4. The Shunammite woman was one that Elijah passed by her place. She was pretty well off, and she would beg him to come in and so she could feed him. And so that was a place for him to rest while as he was traveling through. And she even went as far, since he came through quite a bit, she had her husband build a room up top so that, he could come in, he could sleep. They put a bed in there. They had a desk, a chair, something for him to be able to be comfortable in. And he really appreciated that. And he had talked with Gehazi about what they could do for her. And Gehazi had noticed she did not have a son, and her husband was getting up in years. So he had told the woman that she was going to have a child. And of course, she thought that was crazy, but it happened. A year later, just as Elisha had said, she had this child. But in the course of time, the child passed away. And of course, she immediately sent for Elisha, who sent Gehazi. And Gehazi went, and he was supposed to, put his rod on Elisha's rod on the head of the child to bring it back to life, but nothing was happening. But Elisha definitely could witness the fact this child was dead. And he goes back and tells Elisha. So Elisha goes and brings the child back to life. And, that's a pretty amazing thing to see. When you know for a fact that someone's dead, and Elisha comes and raises someone from the dead by the power of God, then you still have to ask yourself, why did he deceive? Why did he want material things when he had something, that was amazing? And that's a prophet of God who could teach him what God needed him to know. Why deceive? Why would he want to do that? But yet that was something that he did. Maybe there's no answer for it, but we do know when we're asking ourselves about deception, there are passages we need to keep in mind, like in Luke chapter 12 and verse 17. He says, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness. This is Jesus speaking. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So that's something Gehazi should have been watching out for, is covetousness. And we need to be watching out for that as well. Because if we are coveting, then it's possible we might be willing to deceive in order to obtain. And how do we see that manifested today? Well, how many people cheat on their taxes in order to be able to keep a little bit more? They're obtaining something. Even though Jesus said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. That is a form of deception when you lie in your taxes. I have known Christians who have actually turned the odometer back on the mileage on their cars in order to be able to sell it for more money. That's deception. And why are they doing that? Covetousness. Covetousness is going to lead us to try to deceive people. And we got to be careful about that, because God never has liked deception, especially with his people. When Moses was told by his father-in-law that he needed to appoint rulers to help him judge the people, that they were just too great, he looked to do that. And notice what the Lord said about this in verse 21 to Moses. When he was looking for such men, he said, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands and rulers of hundreds and rulers of fifties and rulers of tens. So you see, it was important to the Lord when he was going to have his people led to make sure that they not just don't covet, they hate it. And that's what we need to do today as well. We need to hate covetousness. If we hate it, then we're more likely not to partake in it. And if we're not partaking in it, then we're not going to practice deception, at least in the form that Gehazi did. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10, a passage many are familiar with, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And of course, we see with Gehazi It was his love of things that led to his demise, the judgment that came down upon him. And so we don't want to do that as well. Now, I want you to consider Gehazi's life afterwards, after he had leprosy. This is just a drawing, and you can look it up. It's not a pretty sight, but you can look up pictures on the internet of what people look like with leprosy, and it's not something that you want to see. In 2 Kings chapter 8, Gehazi is still around because he was talking to the king, and the king was actually asking him about, hey, have you witnessed any great works of Elisha lately? And what he told him about was the Shunammite woman. And he told him about him raising him from the dead. But I put this down because Wikipedia, it describes what takes place when you have leprosy. It says it's an infection that can lead to damage of the nerves, respiratory tract, skin, and eyes. This nerve damage may result in a lack of ability to feel pain, which can lead to the loss of parts of a person's extremities from repeated injuries or infection due to unnoticed wounds. An infected person may also experience muscle weakness and poor eyesight. And of course, being an Israelite, you can go to Leviticus chapter 13 and 14 and look at the various laws that pertained to living a life with leprosy as an Israelite. And it's kind of a distant life. You're away from people. And so I don't know in 2 Kings 8 how close he was to the king, but I would imagine they were safe apart. I know they were supposed to cover their mouth to make sure, as we are today with the pandemic, wearing a mask. They were, worried about the spread of such things. So it's sad. It's sad that someone had to live a life like that. However, if it saved his soul, then it's well worth it. And maybe that's why Elisha did what he did. Maybe that's why he cursed him with it. We just don't know. The Bible doesn't say. But we do know it was because of his deception. Judgment came upon him. And likewise, if we deceive today, we know that judgment's coming to us. In Romans chapter 2 and verse 16, it talks about that last day. When Paul said, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus. So if we think we're getting away with deception, again, you're wrong. Judgment's coming. It came to Gehazi, and what you need to know is that it's coming for you too. It'd be coming for me. And so it's very important that we put off deceit. In Colossians chapter 3, and verse 24 and 25. It says, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward, you are serving the Lord Christ, as Gehazi was serving Elisha. And it says, for the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality. So if Gehazi, again, received judgment, being the servant of Elisha, then there's no partiality with God. We're going to receive judgment as well. So this deception that is being practiced, that's a scary thing. We need to make sure that we're not involved in that. And remember, it's very possible to start believing your own lies. Don't let it get to that point. Put these things off. I'm going to leave you with 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11 and 12. These things happened to them as an example, that they were written down for our instruction, upon whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. That passage came from 1 Corinthians 10, which makes references to different stories that took place in the Old Testament. Now, it doesn't bring up Gehazi's deception, but it did take place in the Old Testament, so I think it stands. And so we need to learn from that. This is something we need to pay heed to and put deception out of our life. And my prayer and my aim is that we will all do that, and that we will all hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Okay, that's all I got for you this evening. I hope it's been beneficial to you. If you are ever in the Kearney area, please come worship with us. We meet at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri, and we meet at 9:30 for Bible study on Sunday morning, 10:30 for worship. You can learn about the church by going to www.kearneychurch.com. Now, at www.kearneychurch.com, you're going to see a Facebook button, you're going to see a YouTube button, and a Berean Spirits button. All those buttons are going to enable you to watch some internet shows if you like this one. For instance, the Facebook button will allow you to see Gospel Preaching Live and all the episodes. The YouTube button will allow you to see past episodes and current ones of Gospel Preaching Live. But it's also going to allow you to see Sowers with Swords. That's a show I'm on with my brother-in-law, Chris Peltz of the Southside Church of Christ. And it comes on every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. You can watch it live on the Kearney Facebook or YouTube page. And we discuss issues of the day and how it relates with what the Bible teaches. Another such show airs every Thursday at 10 o'clock, and it's called Berean Spirits. And I'm on that show with 4 other preachers. We tried to study the Bible as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. Again, there's a Berean Spirits button at our website, and you can watch it live there, or you can see it live on our YouTube or Facebook pages. But that's every Thursday at 10 o'clock. Now, if you're in the Kearney area, Sunday mornings at 7 o'clock, you can turn your radio dial to 102.7 FM, KPGZ, and you'll hear a lesson from God's Word. And if you're outside the Kearney area, you can stream it on your device. You can either go to the webpage to stream it, KPGZ's webpage, or you can just use your mobile device and do a search for KPGZ, and it'll pop up, and you'll be able to listen to it. That's what I do, actually. I don't have a radio in the house, so I just pop it on my mobile phone. But you'll hear a gospel lesson, and if you're in the Kearney area, you'll still have time to put your shoes on and come to worship with us. And we'd love to have you. You'd be our honored guest. Okay, remember, if you have any questions, go to gospelpreachinglive@gmail.com and email me. Let me know what you need, or you can call me, 816-686-9517. Our next episode of Gospel Preaching Live will be this Thursday at 7 p.m., and I hope you'll join with us again at that time. Okay, remember, don't forget, this is the day the Lord has made, so let's rejoice in it and be glad.
This has been Gospel Preaching Live. Join us each week as truth is taught, faith is examined, and beliefs are challenged. Be sure and hit the like button so you can be notified of future episodes. And to watch past episodes, go to our website, kearneychurch.com. This has been a work of the Kearney Church of Christ.